Okay, so we have some mics. Hard to manually configure these because they're not easy to do. So what I'm going to do right now is start off talking to you about my perspective on fetching firewood or fetching water. And you see them going backwards and forwards all day long. And we went to a village, a compound just outside Banjul, which is the capital of Gambia. Very, very rural area, very impoverished area. And we went and we spoke to the headman and all of his people. There were about 7 or 8 different, I suppose, families living within the community. And they were all living in very, very small huts with only 1 or 2 rooms where they did everything. The washing, the sleeping, everything was all done in one place. Very, very impoverished. And I noticed all these children walking backwards and forwards with water. And I said to the headman, why are these children walking backwards and forwards with, fetching water? And he said, well, because we used to have a well, but now the nearest well is 4 kilometres in that direction. And I said, well, what happened to your well? And he said, well, it was near the road, and of course all the big lorries were going backwards and forwards, and they collapsed it. And then we can't draw water from it. It's collapsed completely. Show me where it was. It's just a kind of little hole in, a dent in the floor. And I thought, this is just incredible. So I said to him, well, why don't you build another well? And he said, we can't afford to. And I pressed him on. I said, well, why not? What about how much would it cost? And he started getting very upset, and then some of the women started crying, and he started getting upset, and he started crying as well. And I thought, what's going on here? And so eventually I got out of him and I said, how much is it going to cost? And he told me, it's probably going to cost something like about £1,000. Too much money for the whole community to afford. And so we looked around and went, oh, for goodness sake, we gave him some money there and then he really started crying. He really started getting upset. So we raised about 100 and something pounds there and then for him. And then we said, we promise we will go back with the students and we will raise the rest for you. Sure enough, the students came back. This was about 7 years ago now. They came back to Plymouth and they set up a whole lot of charity events. And within the year, they'd raised the extra £800, £900 or whatever it was, and we took it back and we gave it to him. And they built the new well. And now all the students, all the children in that town have become students. They can go to school now. They don't have to spend their days walking backwards and forwards fetching water. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes it's as simple as throwing a bit of money in the solution, but it's not always that simple. It's sometimes much more complex than that. But you've got to ask yourself, these children, what kind of education do they get? If you want to know an international perspective on this, then look no farther than Western Africa, one of the poorest areas of the world, where in Gambia in particular, only primary school education is funded. Children can only go to school until they're 11 years old. After that, if they want to go to school, their parents have to pay for it. And very few families in the Gambia can actually pay for secondary education. You look at the Gambian economy, and you see that what they rely on is agricultural, fisheries, and a bit of tourism. And most of them work in the hotels as very, very low paid workers. And that's their economy, that's what it's based upon. And you look back at the educational system that they've got, and then you see the connection between the two. So often education brings wealth to a country, wealth to the people. But if there's no education, then you can see that there's a correlation between that and poverty in many countries. So, it's all coming together now. So, let's see if I can get this to work. No, it's still not working, so I'll use the keyboard. But look at this here. This is the Save the Children statement. And you heard a quote from Malala Yousafzai in Kath's lecture last week, or earlier this week, last week, when she talked about the pen being, and the paper and the teacher being things that will change the world. So when you look at things like the economy and building communities and peace, all of these areas are very, very wrapped up, very kind of connected to the idea of good education. So you can see the value of education in that sense, what the purpose of education is. Who's watching Genius at the moment on television? Anyone? Anyone watching Genius? It's about Einstein. It's about his early years. And the story goes that when he was, just before the First World War, he created the conditions whereby he was able to formulate a new theory of the universe, and the famous equation E equals mc squared, where he said that everything is relative, where everything relates to everything else. Everything. It's a very simplistic view of his theory, but everything is relative. And he went on a tour of America. They invited him over to America to speak in all the universities there. And very few people knew what he looked like, because there were very few photographs of him in them days. But he went on this tour, went on a steamship across to America, and they met him at the dockside, and they gave him a chauffeur, a driver, to drive him around. The driver wore his traditional outfit with a hat. He was very, very kind of smartly dressed, and drove him from university to university and from hotel to hotel. And every night Einstein would get up and do the same speech. And at the end of it, the whole place would erupt and stand up in applause, and then he'd go to his hotel for the night and drive off the next day to the next university. And after about a dozen of these, the chauffeur was driving him to his hotel for the night and said, "You know, Professor Einstein, I've heard your speech so many times that I can probably do it myself. Word for word. I've got a good memory, I can do it word for word." And so Einstein looked at him and said, "Well, I'm getting tired, why don't we swap? We swap clothes, nobody knows what I look like. Swap clothes, you go up and do my speech, I'll sit at the back dressed as you." And so they did. And the chauffeur got up in Einstein's suit and gave a word-perfect rendition of the special theory of relativity. And then there was a great applause, everyone stood up and they applauded him. And then the chairman of the conference said, "Thank you, Professor Einstein. Are there any questions from the floor?" And at that point he realised he was in trouble. And the first question was from an eminent professor in the front row who stood up and asked the question. He didn't even understand the words that were being used, let alone the question. But he looked around the room, and then the driver had a bit of inspiration, and he said, "Well, thank you for your question, Professor. But it's such a simple question that even my driver at the back could answer it." You see the point? Two types of knowledge here being used. The first is a very superficial type of knowledge where you cram facts into your head. And the second is a much more streetwise level of knowledge where you have planning and you can actually work your way out problems very quickly and critically think on your feet and do things to solve those problems very easily. And that was the second type of knowledge that was being called upon there. So you've got this idea that everything is relative, you've got this idea that there are at least two types of knowledge. And I'll show you a little diagram here which may help you to understand that. Because you see, the thing is, knowledge is not the same as wisdom. Wisdom comes from a lot of experience. Knowledge you can gain instantly by thinking about things and learning about things and learning about the facts and so on. But to go deeper than that, you need wisdom, you need experience. The first one's declarative. Thanks. The first one's declarative, and the second one's procedural. The first one you can say what you know, and the second one you can do what you know. And that's the big difference to me. But there's a third level as well I'd like you to consider here. Knowing that and knowing how are one thing, but knowing why is the really critical element, and this is what we should be, I think, talking about when we talk about 21st century education. And I'm going to give you some examples of that in a moment. What is 21st century education? Why is the critical element so important? And how do we get there? So here's a quote from David Warnock. I'm sure you've seen this before, some of you. The invidious position that all teachers are in now, where we're trying to prepare children for a world that doesn't exist yet. You saw the quotes from Jason Holland last week, where he talked about people trying to solve problems that don't exist yet, with technologies that haven't been invented yet. How do we get children to think in that way? This is one of the biggest problems, I think, for teachers in the 21st century, is this trying to prepare children for that. So, there are three things that are important here. The first is obviously to learn, but the second one is to be able to unlearn, and the third one is to be able to relearn in new ways. Facts change very quickly, some facts more than others. When I was at school, there were 9 planets in the solar system, now there's only 8. Because the last one I think has become a cartoon dog or something, I don't know. But Pluto's missing, it's no longer a planet. If I'd have put that in my exam, that Pluto isn't a planet, I would have failed. But now I would have passed. See what I mean? So there are things changing all the time, lots of things change, and we need to constantly unlearn and relearn things. So this, according to people like Hoffer, is actually one of the biggest skills of the 21st century. And here's another one. Don Tapscott talks about it's not so much what you know anymore that counts, it's how much you can learn. What's the capacity for your learning? How do you learn in new ways? How do you actually assimilate that into new ideas and contexts? So this is an important skill for the 21st century. And you've got to ask yourself, does the curriculum actually hold this? Does the curriculum actually push these ideas? Well, the curriculum is basically content, is it not? So therefore it can't. But the pedagogy behind it should be sufficient to actually push these ideas and actually make them stick. So we need to think about schooling in a very critical way now. What is schooling? Not just what is education, but what is schooling? They're different things. Schooling is not education. We need to think about that statement. Being at school is not the same as being educated. So we need to think critically about it. And see what it is yet. Derek Bock once said, if you think education is expensive, try it once. I was speaking at a learning and development conference not so long back, and I told the story about 2 managers. And they were discussing how expensive it was to train their workforce up and to keep them trained, to keep them updated and constantly professionally developed. And one manager turns to the other and he says, this is really expensive. What if we train them all up and then they all leave? And the other one looked at him and said, what if we don't and they stay? Be even worse, wouldn't it? So therefore, education, you can't put a price on it. If it's good education, you cannot put a price on it. And this is why I think that we have a real problem with funding at the moment in our education systems. I've asked lots of my former students, what's the biggest problem in education at the moment that's facing, what's the biggest challenge that we're facing in schools at the moment? And this is funding. Lack of it. We haven't got enough money. You cannot put a big enough price on good education. I love these pictures because they show what education was like in the old days. And Dave Truss actually says something really profound here. He says the goal of education is to enrich the lives of students while producing, etc., etc. But the bottom line is the most important. But education is about teaching students, not subjects. You don't teach subjects, you teach students. They're real people. They have feelings, they have hopes, they have aspirations, they have families, they have a future. I often, when I was training nurses, used to say to them, look, don't talk about, the appendix in bed number 6, or the hernia in bed number 5. They're people, they have feelings, they have families. It's Mr. Smith in bed number 6, not the appendix. We should be doing the same with looking at how we educate children. They are not figures, they are not metrics. They're all individuals, and they all have different ways of looking at the world, and we should treat them as such. And I like to teach in stories. I like to show you illustrations of principles. And there's a story that when I was working in South Dakota many years ago, as a kind of a paid member of the US government's task force on connecting all the schools up in South Dakota, we actually connected 324 school systems up across the whole state with broadband technology. This was back in 2002. And it was the largest distance education project in the world, and I was being paid to evaluate it. And I heard the story from the governor of the state of South Dakota, who instigated the project. He was being given the American Eagle Award, which was the highest award for education in the United States at the time. And he told the story of how they ran out of money because they bought all the equipment and the expensive connections and so on. And they ran out of money about how to try and install it all. So what they did was they went to the state penitentiaries, and they took all the most trustworthy prisoners, and they took them out and they put them into road gangs, and they taught them how to be electronics and electrical engineers, and then they sent them out with guards into all the schools. Can you imagine the safeguarding issues? In the UK we did that. But they did, and these guys were very dedicated. They wanted to pay back their debt to society, and so they did all the wiring through, and they did all the dirty work and all the putting in of all the equipment and so on. And the story goes, and this is a true story, not like the Einstein one, which was a made-up one, but this is a true story. There was one of the convicts in his orange outfit, his orange overalls, and he was standing on a step ladder with his head and shoulders through the ceiling, all the false tiles in the ceiling, and he was pulling through cables, and there was dust everywhere, he was covered in dust. And this little boy walks past, and looks up and sees him, and looks around, and then walks in, wanders into the classroom, and plucks up the courage to pull his trouser leg and ask him what he's doing. And so the prisoner tells him what he's doing, and he says to him, Mister, are you a prisoner from the state pen? And the prisoner looks down and says, yep, and carries on pulling the cable through. Another tug on the trousers, and the little boy says, did you do something bad to get into prison, mister? Yep, and carries on pulling the dust everywhere. And the little boy, one final tug on the trousers, he said, Mister, can I ask you what you did that was so bad to get you into prison? And the prisoner looked down at him and stopped and said, when I was at school, I didn't listen to my teacher. The boy walks away like this. Never ever will he forget that moment. It's a teachable moment. What you've got here is a prisoner. He's not trained in any way as a teacher. He's not got any pedagogical knowledge whatsoever, but he knows how to hit home and tell a truth. And that little boy will grow up never forgetting that encounter. And I'm telling you now, in 3 or 4 weeks' time, when you get out of here and you start to think about that new job that you're starting in September, and when you get into your classroom in September, you should be constantly looking out for teachable moments, moments where you can take that advantage and turn it around into something that will teach children something they will never forget for the whole of their lives. That's what it means to be an educator and not just a teacher. Because teachers can teach, you see, but educators can reach and go far. So always aspire to be an educator, not just a teacher. You see, doctors save lives, but teachers make lives. I love that maxim because it's so true. We have different roles in society, but teachers actually make lives. We actually make the difference. That's why it's so important to be an educator in the 21st century. Here's my two of my kids. I've got 3 kids that I know of. Here's 2 of them. This is my 2 eldest daughters. It's Amy on the left and Katie on the right, but they've both got degrees now. And I asked them once, I said, what's the best thing about going to school? And this was a few years back when they were still at school. And their answer was quite simple. What's the best thing about school, my friends? You ask any child, what's the best thing about school? And most of them will say, my friends. They get a chance to sit with all their friends and learn together, have fun together, hopefully go home together and play together and so on. So never underestimate the power of friendship in school. But here, when I asked them what was the worst thing about school, different answer completely. Being treated like you're an idiot. Needs some thinking about, doesn't it? Here's the question for you. Does education need transformation? Well, I'm going to rush through these because Nietzsche has something to say about this. These slides will be available on the DLE afterwards. But I think that's so true in many ways. When you start looking at massification of something as precious as education, when you start looking at things like standardization of learning, where a one-size-fits-all is the only philosophy you're going to adhere to, then you start to get problems. Then the standard of that product goes downhill fast. We need to think critically about education. And I'm using the word critically regularly here, and I will use it repetitively to try and drum into you the idea that this is what you should be doing in your assignment. So people like Sir Ken Robinson talk about the factory model of education. They talk about the idea that education was premised on the basis that we were preparing children for a world of work which was repetitive, systematic, managed, rationalised, standardised, and so on. This is why when they ring the bell at lunchtime, every child in that school has to be hungry, because that's lunchtime. And when the bell rings again, they have to be finished with what they're doing and ready to go back to the classroom again. And at the front of the class is the foreman, the teacher, the supervisor. So you've got at least 4 features of the old factory model. There's the synchronization of behaviour through things like ringing bells, which reminds me of Pavlov's dogs in many ways. It's about managing behaviour, managing expectations. The second one is compartmentalisation of ideas, compartmentalisation of subjects, compartmentalisation of classes, compartmentalisation of what each teacher does. It's almost like a divide and rule system if you start looking at a Marxist approach to it. The third is batch processing. We batch process children by the age that they appear in the school, not by their abilities. And I think that's a fascinating approach, but it's not necessarily the correct approach. It's great for the school because it's so easy to manage, but how effective is it when we look at people's individual learning? And finally, we standardise testing. We standardise content. We standardise everything that the children get at that age. I've written a blog post this morning on SATs. This is SATs week. And every teacher knows what SATs week's all about because everyone's struggling to try and manage the process. And before that, you can guarantee that most of them have struggled to try and get children ready for it because that's the big thing, measuring how children do in a standardised test, a statutory test. Because each school is judged by the government, who is the funder, on the basis of what the SATs will reveal for that school. It's pressure upon pressure. Children are physically sick because they're so stressed and worried. The teachers go home with headaches, totally fatigued because they have had to wrestle with this idea for the last term. Is this the correct way to be doing education? Is it personalised learning? Well, this is the old school system. This is what it used to look like. And of course, what we do is we say, okay, we're going to give children a new idea, we're going to give them a new perspective, we're going to give them new opportunities, we're going to produce a personalised learning for them. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce technology into the classroom now, and that will give them a personalised perspective on learning. And this is what it looks like. Vastly different, isn't it? No, it's not. Still the same principle. It's now they've got a screen in front of them. We need to radically rethink. Even the introduction of technology, is that preparing learners for the future or the past? You've heard that before. Education is changing, but it's not changing fast enough. That's the general critique. So, our students, our young people, interested in things that are happening in school, or are they interested in things that are happening outside of school? What's the most important thing for them? What are they more interested in pursuing? Here's a young lady I met last year when I was speaking in Paris at the Mobile Learning Week at the UNESCO building. And she said something very profound. She was 13 at the time, she'd be 14 now, Manon she's called. Me and my school friends like to be given challenges and problems to solve. We do not like being told what the answers are. They are willing to do the exploration and the discovery themselves, provided you give them the environment within it, which it works. They don't want to be told all the answers all the time. They'd rather be given the chance to discover for themselves. I'll tell you a story about me, actually. This is me when I was 8 years old. I haven't changed much, have I, really? When I was 8, I think you'd have liked to have been around me because I was quite sociable. I was quite, quiet but a bit sociable, a little bit bashful, a little bit shy. And when I went to school, this was in Wiltshire, some of you may have heard the story before, I remember being in a class doing something around literacy, which was called English in them days, English language. And I remember plucking up the courage to put my hand up and ask the teacher a question. I said, please miss, can you tell me, is there a difference between the word desert and the word desert? She looked at me and she looked her eyes wide and she looked at the church and she said, what a stupid question. And she turned to the church and said, isn't that a stupid question, children? Hasn't Steve asked a stupid question there? And they all laughed at me. And I learned a very important lesson that day, and that is you never ever ask questions in class, because you're going to get laughed at. And it took me until I was in my late 20s, early 30s to actually come out of that and actually realise that actually if you ask questions, you're going to learn. But for the rest of my my learning career as a student in school, I shut up and sat at the back and kept my hands down and never asked any more questions ever again. Now, here's the end of the story, because it's quite an interesting one. Here's the etymology of the word desert. I checked it recently just to see if I was right, and I was. Because the word desert, as in a barren, arid, abandoned place, and the word desert, as in the verb to leave up behind, means to abandon. So they have the same root word. As you can see, they're desertum as in Latin. So I was right and she was wrong. And I'll tell you what I think she was thinking about at the time. I think she was thinking about dessert. As in, it was near lunchtime, yeah? And here's a really important message for you all as teachers who are just about to qualify. Always listen to what children say. Never dismiss their questions. Because there's no such thing as a stupid question. There are lots of stupid answers, and no stupid questions. Always listen to the children that are in your classroom because they want to learn. They're inquisitive. They're curious. Never dismiss them. And certainly never ever get other children to laugh at them. a little lad playing something. He's doing maths actually with an iPad. And I think that's quite interesting to look at because clearly he's very engaged in it. And we have to ask ourselves, is this generation the net generation? Is this generation Vreeman Vakin called Homo sapiens? Is this generation digital natives? We need to think critically about technology. We need to think critically about how it impacts upon our children's learning. And if I show you this, and I say, what's wrong with it, what would you say? I asked one group of students many years ago what it meant, and what was the wrong with it, and one of them said, is it 70%? Just goes to show you that with all the fake news and all the alternative truths around and all the kind of websites with erroneous content on them, that we obviously need digital wisdom these days. And we should be instilling this in our students as well, to get them to think critically about everything that they look at on the web. And there'll be more and more of this coming through. Content is increasing on the web. It's exponentially increasing all the time. And therefore they'll be using it a lot more in the future to learn. We've got to think about this. We've got to say to them, okay, be careful what you read and always cross-check it. This is an opportunity, a teachable moment for you, where you can get children to start thinking critically at a very early age and to start thinking about the provenance and the veracity of what they're watching and looking at on YouTube or on Facebook or wherever. Now moving on again, because there's this idea as well of the selfie. That's not a real picture, by the way, just in case you wondered. They didn't have iPhones in Abraham Lincoln's day. But obviously they did have cameras, but they weren't as small as that. But can you see how easy it is to do that? With a bit of photoshopping, not hard to do, is it, Keith? And you can do it. I'm sure some of you could as well. Yeah, it's not hard to do. But we need to also concern ourselves with how we depict ourselves online. Now, I've done a lot of this work with the digital reputation modules, but here's a picture. I'm sure you recognise some of these people here. So there's two of last year's third years now qualified, well, they're in their NQT year. That's Becca and Kate, and I took them up with me to Manchester to a keynote speech I was giving, and I spoke for about 20 minutes, and then I introduced those two onto the stage. And all these guys in the audience here are professors and lecturers and so on. And so what did Becca and Kate do as soon as they got up? Get the selfie stick out, and they took a big selfie of everyone. You see, everyone loves it. You see people waving in the background and smiling and so on. There's even a guy here taking a picture of us taking a picture of him, taking a picture of us. It's like meta stuff going on here. But the whole point about this is, there's a place for selfies, and there's a place for, kind of presenting your image online. But there's also a place for when you are a professional that you need to think about what you are presenting and what you are revealing to the public and what you are keeping private. There's a fine line there, and you need to decide what that is as a professional as you embark on your teaching career. And then introducing computers into schools is always a big problem because, it was always a big problem at the start, but introducing any new technology into schools is always going to be met with some opposition. And when I first introduced computers into the School of Nursing back in 1983, 82, it was a big thing in them days because up until that point computers were only used for storing and sorting data, and now suddenly they were being used for teaching and learning. And one lecturer actually came to me and said, "Steve, I'm really worried about this. Do you think that computers will ever replace teachers?" And I quoted this guy here, Arthur C. Clarke, the author, when he said, "Any teacher who can be replaced by a computer should be." I'll take that a step further and I'll say that actually computers won't replace teachers, but teachers who use technology will be replacing teachers who don't. And that's, I think, going to be very true in the future. We all need to be fairly digitally literate if we're going to be effective teachers in the 21st century. That's my argument. There are various tools that we can use to actually create our content and to engage with other tutors. I would suggest to you that as a professional educator, as you get into your career, you're going to want to network more and more because you want to learn more and more, not just from the people in your own school, your own colleagues in the school that you'll be working in, but also teachers in other schools as well. And there's various ways of doing this. So you can go to teach meets. Who's been to a teach meet? Not many of you. I expect more of you to do that because it's a great fun thing. It's quite informal. And you get someone stands up for 5 or 10 minutes and says something they've learned, and everyone shares from it and learns from it. But that's not the only way. You can also use any of these tools here to get involved in communities of practice out there online. So you can be sharing ideas with teachers from Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland or even farther afield. You know, in places like America where they do things differently, but you can still learn from each other. And I think it's a really important thing as teachers that we continually update ourselves. That for me is part of the purpose of education. It's about getting from skills up to mastery, going past the level of skills that chauffeur, Einstein's chauffeur had, right up through to the level of mastery where you become fairly expert at being a teacher in your classroom. Where you can do it almost, without thinking, although of course you do need to think all the time. But you can do certain skills unconsciously, without struggling too much. That's the point where I think you can say that you can start to master education. But the caveat there is, of course, that you never ever stop learning. There's always more to learn. So always be prepared to learn and learn and learn. So I would suggest that maybe we never get to the apex of that pyramid. We're always trying to get there. And I just want to say a few words about assessment. I think you know Black and Williams' concept of assessment for learning, rather than just of learning, where assessment becomes a part of your pedagogical toolkit, where you actually allow children to express themselves, and then you give them feedback on how well they've expressed themselves, or you allow them to write something or present something or make something or do something, and then you give them feedback on how they can do it better next time. So assessment for learning is increasingly going to become a really important part of the teacher's toolkit as we go through the 21st century. So we need to think critically about assessment as well. And remember, you can assess without testing. Lots of ways of assessing without testing. Right. Who knows what this is? Where are the mathematicians? Anyone know what this is? Shout it out.
Is it a fractal?
It's a fractal. Well done, Kat. What kind of fractal? Anyone know the name for this type of fractal? It's called the Mandelbrot set, named after the mathematician who devised it. Essentially what it is, it's a system, it's a mathematical depiction where you regress to infinity. Okay, recurse to infinity. And everything on there actually has a smaller part of it and then a smaller part of it again. So it's a basic mathematical formula that regresses to infinity, but it's in pictorial form. And when we talk about recursion, that's what we talk about, repeating and repeating and repeating. And for many, many years, education was recursive. In other words, the teacher stands at the front of the class, gives the students every bit of knowledge that they've got in their head, then the students go away, remember the knowledge, and then when they become teachers, they teach the same knowledge to their students, so on. It becomes recursive. Okay? Nobody learns anything new unless they make an effort, because all they're doing is learning what they need to learn to pass the test. It's a very superficial form of learning. What we need to do is to go from recursive to discursive. In other words, we need to start thinking about the critical aspects of why we're learning something, how we're learning it, what we're going to do next, and so on, and the context around which it's being learned. Ultimately, we need authentic types of learning which we can apply in everyday life and then learn again from that. The unlearning and the relearning part. Okay? Now, I'll give you some examples of recursive learning. Here we go, it's the first one. Mathematicians here will appreciate that this symbol on the right hand side here, this 8 on its side, is a symbol for infinity. That's right. So this is a mathematical equation that apparently has no answer because it goes on and on forever. So infinity is the only answer then. Okay? So the teacher gives the student, this is an example, and then asks her to work one out for herself. And here's the result. It is funny, but it's also tragic because the student hasn't got it. You can see they haven't got it. All they're doing is repeating a very superficial behaviour. There's no understanding behind that equation. All they're doing is looking for the figure on the right-hand side at the bottom and then turning it on its side because that's what they think is happening on the top one. Lack of understanding. And this is not really the student's fault. This is a failure in pedagogy. It's a failure of the teacher not to explain it. And maybe you can blame both of them. But somehow there's a disconnect between the understanding and the actual facts. Okay? Here's some other failures in pedagogy. So the child is asked to find X. There it is. They found it. They've answered the question. So why did they get a big fat 0? Why is it wrong? My argument would be it's not wrong. The question's wrong. They've asked the wrong question there. They've not explained to the student what they want. I'll give you a few more. Just briefly explain what hard water is. It's a perfectly acceptable answer. It's not what the teacher wants though. The teacher's saying, guess what's inside my head, and the student can't guess it because the student can't see inside his head. Can you see how this goes all goes wrong, how it all unravels? I'll give you a couple more. And this is a really good one. Expand. He's expanded it. And the teacher's sarcastic comment, very funny, Peter. And across the bottom saying wrong. Okay? And you can go on and on with these, I won't. But really, you see, the problem is assessment fails because the pedagogy fails. The students aren't being instructed in the right way or taught in the right way, or they're not being given the opportunity to explore or discover for themselves, and therefore they haven't found that understanding that the teacher requires, or the teacher hasn't asked for that understanding explicitly. So often assessment fails because the pedagogy is failing. And I want you to think about that as you embark upon your careers. How you assess is going to be vitally important. Ipsative assessment, some of you know about this because I keep hammering it into you. Ipsative assessment is when you measure a student's learning against their own previous attainment. I think it was very much rooted in the special educational needs movement back in the 50s and 60s, but it's now, I think, an important part of our assessment strategy. If we want to measure students fairly, then we should try and measure them against their own previous attainment. And games has a great ability to do that because children all the time are trying to get to the next level, aren't they? It's a motivational aspect of what they're doing when they're playing games. So here's a really good one. This is a college class. They were asked to write a short story in as few words as possible. The instructions were it had to have 3 things. Firstly, religion. Secondly, sexuality. And thirdly, mystery. And the shortest story of the lot, and the only one that got an A+, was this one here. You're allowed to laugh, it's not that funny. But you are allowed to laugh if you want to. Okay, so moving on. We need to think critically about what is learning, what is knowledge, and how is it expressed within your classroom. That's the conundrum you have to face. I just want to think critically about some other things here now. Some of you may be familiar with the VAK model, Visual, Auditory and Kinesthetic model. Neil Fleming's model came from New Zealand. So the visual learner is somebody who sees and reads. The auditory learner is someone who hears and speaks, and the kinesthetic learner is someone who touches and does and moves around. And apparently, according to this theory, children fall into one of those 3 categories. And now the danger is that teachers will say, oh, well, this Sophie's a visual learner, so we're going to give her lots of things to read and look at. Maybe we'll involve her more in art, but we won't do music with her because that's all about hearing. It's kind of like a really dangerous thing, isn't it, to do, because you're excluding children from all the experiences. Let me tell you where this comes from. You ever thought about the origins of it? Here we are. Here's the 3 in a Venn diagram, and if I say to you, I hear and I know, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. Is that familiar? Some attribute that to Confucius, maybe it even goes farther back than that. But this is the basis upon which this theory was formulated, I believe. And I'll take it a step farther. Situated learning is the most powerful type of learning, I think. It's the learning where you gain the context of what you're learning. It's authentic types of learning, and you have to bring all three of those together. So what you're doing is looking for deeper learning where you have all three of those combined. So please, 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 if you're going to look at that theory of VAK, look at it in its best context where you combine all of those three together and you stretch children in areas where they have a deficiency. Alright, so if you think they're just a visual learner, provide them with auditory and kinesthetic experiences to stretch them in that direction as well. That way you're going to get a holistic perspective on learning. That way it's going to be deeper. And just a few more ideas here. This idea of the activist, reflective theorist and pragmatist, this is Honey and Mumford's theory of learning styles. And then you look at this theory here, which is an experiential learning theory by David Kolb. And I think you can see how they borrowed from each other. I think Honey and Mumford actually stole Kolb's ideas by the looks of it. My perspective on this is that I think there are as many learning styles as there are people. If I asked each of you to tell me your preferred learning style, you'd all be telling me something different. I don't think we can pigeonhole students. I think it's dangerous to do so. I think it's dangerous to categorize students as this or that. We should see them as people who want to learn in many different ways. So avoid these pitfalls in your careers. Don't categorize people. Here's one more. This is the really holy grail one. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And of course that's sanctified, isn't it? It's the holy grail. You're not allowed to criticize this one because it appears in so many books and so many journals and so much research. But a friend of mine once said, the only reason that Maslow has become so popular is because triangles look great on PowerPoint slides. It has something to say because obviously we're looking at social context here and psychological needs, but what is self-actualization? Can anyone explain it? Can anyone explain what a peak experience is? Can anyone suggest that you can only get there through one way, and that is through working through all the others first? Carl Rogers actually talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs very disparagingly. He said, actually, some of my clients have self-actualized instantly without going through all these other processes. You look at the way Maslow got his data, and it was all largely through analysis of, I suppose, largely white, Anglo-Saxon, middle-aged men. There were very few females and very few ethnic minority groups within that group. So you could argue also that his data was flawed because it's a very Western, white, male-dominated model explanation. Frank Coffield nailed it when he said all of these learning styles, theories and models, they suffer from a serious conceptual confusion. They suffer from a real problem when it comes to rigor and accumulated theoretical knowledge. We have to examine everything critically if we're going to be successful as educators. Otherwise we start following down all these erroneous traps like brain gyms, and we spend all of our school money on things that are not really workable. So we need to think critically about all these things. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to leave that open until tomorrow. What are the barriers to creativity? You looked at creativity with Sadie and with Caroline in the first session. And I'm going to leave you to think about what is creativity, and I'm going to revisit that with you with the rest of the slideshow tomorrow. Okay, so we've come to 4 o'clock now. We started late. And I'll ask you, firstly, if there are any questions, quick questions, before our next speaker comes. No questions at all? Has anyone tweeted any questions? I'll look at those. And I'll come back to you tomorrow. So think about the questions you want to ask and we'll carry on with this tomorrow. So in the meantime, thank you very much. Take a quick 2-minute break while we set up for our next speakers. Okay, everyone, we're about to start, but the people who are coming into Plymouth, they've requested that you come down a bit farther. So can you come down and occupy these seats down here, please, so that you're closer to the action. Can you do that now, please, so we don't waste any time? Come on, don't be shy. Come on. Down and sit down in these front rows here, come on. Much better. You'll see more. That's it. Come down from the back. Come on down. Thank you very much. Has everyone signed the register, by the way? If you haven't, come and see me in the end. Come on. Come down to the front row.
So proud to see an enchanted study specialist leading the way. It's wonderful. Nothing shy about pushing the boundaries all the time. Like 4 guests, we've got 6 altogether, but these 4 are coming to give you something. Say hello to them, would you, as they give something to you. Number 9 is Piers. Say hi, Piers. He's good to you. Yeah, great. And we've got Finn here. We've got Minnie in the white t-shirt, and Lily, I can't believe it, with no shoes on. Never ever. Lily with no shoes on. Finn with the hat on. Piers with number 9 on the back. It was probably Charlton in my day. And Minnie over there in the white. Okay. This is really truly interactive, I understand, so it's good to get this out. This is all good use of resources, isn't it? Right at the beginning, get the resources in the learner's hands. Okay, pass them on quickly. Looks like you might need a pen ready as well. Or a pencil or something, right? Okay. If you haven't got one now, you've missed it. Okay, we'll get underway. I'm absolutely delighted. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome these 6 friends here this afternoon. On the piece of paper that Steve, or the grid, the timetable that Steve put out, it said Phil, Selby and discussion for this afternoon. I've got something much more exciting for you than that. As you know, I'm an early childhood studies specialist. Thanks very much indeed, guys. I'm an early childhood studies specialist, and I have the delight every year of taking some students to Dartington and a small school called Park School in the grounds of Dartington Hall near Totnes. And the teacher in charge of that school, which is effectively a primary school, is Amanda here. And my students have a great time there, and I'm delighted to welcome Amanda, but also Sean, husband and wife, Sean Bellamy, Amanda Bellamy, yes? Go ahead. Yes. Sean is a founder teacher of Sound School, not too far down the road from Totnes in Ashburton. And our friends here are from that school, which is essentially secondary phase. I'm not going to tell you any more about what they're going to do, but it's exciting. Thanks very much.
So Sean's going to start, so here we go, Sean.
So some of this is going to be about risk and choice, and this thing here isn't anything to do with risk. This was being run over in Dubai airport by a shopping trolley. So some students from Park move on to SANS, and these are schools which celebrate the idea that children are wise. And that story comes out of a place called Dartington Hall School, which is really worth investigating. It was built around the philosophy by a guy called Tagore, and 2 fascinating, what would be considered Lords of the Manor and Lady of the Manor, set up a school in 1927 on the Dartington estate, which celebrated the idea that children should be allowed to choose and find their own route through their education. And that ran incredibly successfully until the late 70s, when something about that style of education, which was very liberal, children were swimming naked in swimming pools together, both genders, teachers were just having the most fantastic relationship with young people throughout that time. Something began to happen, and then tragedy struck when I got there as a teacher in 1985, and there were 2 utterly tragic deaths. One young guy was riding his motorbike through what was their fantastic cross-country course and went straight through a plate glass window. And a young girl drowned in the river. This was a late night swim. She was having adventurous times, as young people do. She was taking risks. Both people taking risks which went tragically wrong. And combined with that, with the fact that this school began to find itself out of date with some of its attitudes, the school closed. It was announced when I first got there in 1985 it would close the next year. And so we sat in the garden with a group of children who were going to be ejected from this school, which had become their home. They would start at Allo Park, which is the buildings that Amanda now inhabits, as 4 or 5-year-olds, and they could go right through to 18 in this school. And their home was being taken away because it was a boarding school. So we sat in the garden and we designed a school for the first time with children, not with children in mind, but with children. They told us what it should be like. And Park was designed almost the same time by a group of educators listening to children. And so the story we're going to tell is what happens when you listen to kids rather than think you found clever philosophies, that you think the pedagogy you're getting in your lectures is often delivered by brilliant educators. But we said, why don't we flip it and actually listen to children? And so today's exploration is about what happens when you listen.
Some of you might have watched the video of Park School, but I think it'd be nice if you watch it again if you haven't. So Phil could put it on. It was actually made by some students with their father, who was a filmmaker. So it was helped along by the children. So I hope you enjoy it, and then we'll have some time afterwards. Primary education, absolutely, but we really offer much, much more than that.
What is important about having such big grounds is that the children are acquainted with those grounds and the seasons and the celebrations that work within those seasons. And it's understanding that there is a natural cycle with everything that is around us, and keeping that connection with nature because we're still part of nature. They're not forced into doing exams assembly as hard. They're not compressed into a sort of conveyor belt that everybody must be at a certain standard at the same time. Because that will establish later. If their foundations are strong, they'll get it. Tree climbing, and whittling sticks, and all those lovely things that you might remember doing as a child that are removed from primary education is actually a really important part of just developing. Celebrations as well, really important to understand where they come from. We all kind of understand them in quite a commercial way, but if you step back a bit and underpin something that is celebrated through many cultures in a similar way, then there's truth in that and the understanding is genuine.
With the relationships that we have with the children, there's an open and honest communication that happens between everyone in the school, so that their voices can be very clearly heard.
Just the web bit.
Are you going to say, hello?
So good that you all said steak and you didn't go, that's weird, it's got tomato.
A time to have a childhood, a time to play, a time to be able to make mistakes. Children learn the things when they are ready to learn them. And so the child, when they're ready to learn, will fly. So I hope you've got something out of that. What I'd like you to do now is a little workshop. Got you working a little bit. In front of you, I have a piece of paper. Some of you might have turned it over already and seen something on the back. What I'm going to give you is about 5 minutes to do what it says on the back. And try not to talk to anyone yet. It can be any age child you want. It could be you even. different sorts of papers in this room actually, they're 2 different colours. So if you could try from the back to swap over each other, you should be able to work out that you have a different colour in your hand within about 10 seconds. I see we're nearly there. Anyone not swapped yet, put your hand up, I'll help you. Okay, now take the time to read what your friend has written. Just a moment.
So we've had a chance to have a look at each other's sheets. So there was you can probably imagine there's a logic to it. We tend to work in situations where we try to fight boxes. You guys are going to be walking into education where they might expect you to fit things into boxes. So we gave you some. We gave you boxes, and on the back we gave you a list of things to put in the boxes. And one of the sheets gave you boxes but nothing. We just were really excited and interested to know what you would choose to fill those 2 days with. Are you going to stay with what an expectation is? That you think young people need to be delivered X, Y, and Z, maths and English? Or are you going to think outside the box? Be really interested if any of you would like to share what you put in or what you've seen. So think, did you then put in, they need their maths hour and they need the literacy, and of course they need a sports session. Those with the open box go, I wonder what I'd have put in if it was my perfect day. And we're asking you to think and transport yourself back to this age and think what would have been a really good day. And I wonder whether starting with maths followed by English would have been your perfect day, or even good education. So that's our challenge to you.
So does anyone want to share anything they did want to do on their perfect day?
The family wants to be outdoors, there's a lot of learning.
Outdoors, outside, fantastic. Anybody else?
We had a day just time to do nothing.
Yes, I like it. Because nothing is never nothing, is it? No. That's fantastic. Anything else?
I wanted to have the choice to do what I wanted to do.
Nice. You can't be wrong. You really can't be wrong.
There's no wrong answers. The others?
You might want to stand and defend the fact that it's really important to offer children every day some of these essential building blocks for their skills so they can be great readers or writers. That's also right.
I wanted to spend day with my family.
Nice.
I do it with a personal perfect day, not an academic. I had a never sheet. I put in team building exercises as well.
Any more?
Go on a trip.
Go on a trip, fantastic. What trip would you go on? The zoo. My class is actually planning their trip to the zoo today, exactly. That's exactly what they said they wanted to do, so that's where we're going. So there's researching it now. So yeah. So maybe when you're in your classroom and you're thinking, gosh, what am I going to do tomorrow? Make it exciting, make it a perfect moment for you. Because if you're excited and you're passionate, it will surely come across. So yeah.
So we have an extension to the exercise.
Yeah, I think you can just have in your mind one of the days which is blank. And in that, one of those days, I want you to think of something that isn't necessarily in a classroom, maybe outside. maybe, especially if you're someone in early years, but I've had my children who are 11 doing this. We've got a huge sandpit at Sands Park, I mean, I haven't got the Sands, have you? Not yet. No. At Park. And I want you to think, if you have your children in a massive sandpit, what would they get out of it if you let them be there for the whole morning? I want you to discuss with each other what you feel they will get out of it. What?
When we have our school meeting, we want people to gather again to the chair, because if you have a student chair, or when you're doing an activity, with your class or even in this situation, what we have is a thing where it's about awareness of others. So what would happen is you would, when you finished as a couple working, you would raise your hand quietly and say nothing. And then what happens is there's an amazing cascade effect as others realise that others are ready and they give up what they're doing because they feel like, oh, we should all, okay. And within about 40 seconds, the whole room is silent and waiting. And it feels a really lovely way to bring the class, because you're not being the person bringing them back, they're bringing each other back to attention with each other. So it's really respectful. It isn't about, here I am at the centre, I need your attention again. It's saying, would you pay attention to each other? So when you're doing an activity, might be someone in the back going, you know, I've had enough, and there's a sense, isn't there, that something's changed, and you check, and then soon the whole room quietens, and you're focused again. It might be worth thinking about. You can work with university students, you can work with 4-year-olds. It's a really lovely technique, and it would mean, as I say, you all become conscious of each other rather than your own heads.
But now we have their attention, we can't do that, can we? No. Does anyone want to give some feedback about what you feel the children might learn being in the sandpit for a long time?
Awareness of self and of others.
That's really true. I had a group of children playing in the sand pit yesterday, and some of them wanted water in the sand pit and some of them didn't. So they had to work out how to share that sand pit with dry and wet sides, and it was quite complicated. The conversations that they had were pretty intense, I can tell you, so that was brilliant, thank you. Anything else?
We talk about fundamental movement skills, like PE, from crawling, maybe jumping in, like those kind of things.
Lots of physical movement, thank you, yeah, loads.
They could learn about material properties.
Definitely, they definitely know what's happened when you have wet sand and you don't want it wet. You want dry sand. Yes, they do learn a lot about properties. Thank you, a lot of science happening.
They can design something and then evaluate it once they've built it and created it and then redesign.
That's absolutely right. They made this fantastic tunnel and it completely collapsed and they had to make it again. So they did a lot of designing and a lot of evaluating, indeed.
There's opportunities for them to use their imagination and role play and things like that, just general play.
General play, which is children's work, exactly. The imagination and the drama and the literacy skills and how they can communicate to each other was incredible when I was watching them play, so thank you, yeah. tell you that every single bit of the curriculum that I've ever known, and I've taught for 33 years, I saw in that sandpit when I was watching them today. And actually, what I realised was if I'd let them just play in the sandpit for 10 minutes, for half an hour, it wouldn't have been as much. And it was about allowing children to do things for long periods of time wherever possible, if you can. It's a really important and valuable skill. So I think we're going to go on to the next thing now.
So we need you to be our guinea pigs. Please, please be our guinea pigs. So we've been asked to do a TED Talk. Sans asked, they said, would you do a TED Talk? And they wanted to know a theme, and we said, should we do something on risk? The teenage brain and risk. And so we would like you to be our evaluators and our judges and give us some feedback, because these guys have been working for 2 days, because Ted gave us 2 months less notice than they normally do. So on Sunday night we've got our brief. Would you like to do a TED Talk on Friday? And they want to see if you guys can give them some. They're going to talk maybe for the first time they've spoken sometimes in public. And certainly these words they've not rehearsed very much. So it'd be really lovely to have feedback as educators about what resonated with you about what they were saying. And it's around the idea that the teenager is sort of hardwired for problem-solving communication risk. And it's true of younger kids when they're in those sandpits, that's also happening. But you hit the teenage years, I'm sure you all recognise it. There's something about wanting to find the edges. And we're trying to explore that. We would love you to be our audience if you would indulge us and tell us what you think of our stories.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is going to work. I think so. Okay. Hello, I'm Lily, and I travelled the world to find my voice. Today, as Sean said, we're talking about risk. And I'm in particular talking about risk of opinion. I grew up in New Zealand. I lived there for 12 years, and yeah, it was great. But my family were always quite quirky and different and fun, although where I went to school that wasn't really encouraged. I wasn't allowed to be myself or have my own voice or opinion. And I am very opinionated. I mean, the people that know me will know I'm a very opinionated person. But my opinions used to come out of fear and anger. They used to come out of rebellion because I wasn't allowed to explore how I felt about things. I wasn't allowed to know my voice or what I was trying to say. And then I came here. I came to a school and a place where that was encouraged, where you were allowed to find out what you wanted to say, and you could discuss it with other people, and they would listen and they would respond. And that was amazing, but it also was definitely a risk, because we're a school on democracy. We run on minority and majority. And you may not always have the popular opinion. What you're saying may not be what people want to hear, which means you can be rejected, you can face conflict, all of it. People might not agree. Now this is an example. It's a polar bear made out of recycled cardboard. I built this with a group of people that came in and out, changed around a bit, but everyone said you can't do it. They said you don't have time, you're going to miss lessons, it's just not going to work. Or people thought, you know, why don't you just go have fun with your friends instead of building a polar bear? But we did it. We managed to do it in not much time. We had to stay after school and do things. And me and my mum walked up onto Dartmoor carrying a cardboard polar bear. And luckily, over 200 people joined, which was quite unexpected since it was one of the worst days of the year. But that to me proves that my opinion can change something and make a difference. That it can do something because other people will listen. And I'm sure everyone in this room has faced conflict and people have disagreed with them. I know that people have disagreed with me, and that's been difficult, and sometimes you back down. But if you really want to stand up, you have to risk it, because it pays off. I don't really know where this ends, this talk, because as Sean said, we have not rehearsed yet, and we don't know where it's going. But that's as far as I've got so far, and so I'll hand it over to Piers.
Hi, I'm Piers, and I started SANS when I was 13, and from a very conventional private school, I thought it would be a new start and a new chance to become who I wanted to be. Unfortunately, it didn't start out like this. I was very anxious about about social situations, and I used my laptop as a barrier from the outside world and avoided socialising as much as possible. And if I did ever socialise, I socialised with younger people whose opinions didn't matter to me so much. These people were never really my friends, and they weren't the people I wanted to be around, but they were just the easiest option. If I was ever previously told to come off my computer by a teacher or a parent, I wanted to rebel against it, and it only made it worse. I used online games to escape and replace real-life social interactions. I could freely talk to people on games in a way that I could never have had the confidence to do in real life. It was like the computer screen was a mask that disguised who I really was. I could be whoever I wanted, and it didn't really matter if I made a fool of myself, because I was never going to really meet them. Playing online games didn't build confidence like it would have in real life social interactions. And I don't believe I gained any social skills from it. And it felt very fake and unsatisfactory. I had school council, which helped, but a big step for me was school camp, the second year at SANS. We all went to France, and I didn't take my laptop, and there was no Wi-Fi for me to connect my phone to. A lot of the younger years didn't go to camp, so I was forced, in a way that wasn't anyone telling me what to do, to socialise with people in my year. This was one of the best best weeks of my life. On camp, I had to find different things to do rather than hide on my laptop. We did a lot of biking, leaping off sand dunes, sitting and hanging around on the beach. At the end of the week, I'd realised what it could be like without my computer, and I knew I wanted to change. I'd known previously, in the back of my mind, I had to change, but that week of camp brought it to the forefront and made me want to take that risk. At that point, I realised that the worst that could happen was that I would be rejected and end up back to the place I was before. I didn't have anything to lose, so I was prepared to take that risk. When I got back to school, I completely stopped even going into the room where I had always been on my computer, and where the younger years hung out. I kept my computer in my bag and forced myself into social situations. Even if I didn't have anything to say, I would just hang around in the peer group until eventually I was adding to the conversation as part of that group. The lesson that I've learned is that if you want something really badly, you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone, and you don't know what will happen until you try. And the worst that can happen is generally not as bad as you first think. Now I'm 17, and the person I wanted to be when I was 13, I am now starting to recognise. That's the end of my speech.
Okay, I'm going to use this little thing as a podium because I wrote half of this in the car on my way here. So teenagehood, as you probably all know, is I don't see a problem with this. Taking risks is one of the most common and exciting ways that that young adults can test themselves about their surroundings and their lives in general. So my question is, why are people so scared of risk generally? Why is it demonised? And why is a risk taker labelled as stupid or attention seeking? So this is what I'm going to explore. There was a study done in the 1970s by a woman who went to live in a tribe in a jungle in Venezuela, and she observed the way parents of babies approached risk. The mothers of these babies did not fear or fight risk, and instead they accepted it. So these babies and small children would crawl around open fires and deep holes in the ground. And because of their natural instincts to survive and avoid danger, they were never harmed. So teenagers are effectively like babies. They need to be able to take risks in order to grow. And we know this, generally we know this. We can see this every weekend. And we live in such a risk-averse society. The risks we as young people can take are so limited and controlled that every weekend becomes proof of how much young people crave these thrills and challenges. I could be wrong, but I truly believe these risks are one of the most important parts of becoming an adult. I think risk-taking should be celebrated and encouraged, and certainly not feared.
Hey, I'm Finn. And I don't feel qualified to tell you something clever, quirky, or new. So I'm just going to tell you my story as a young person around going through a school that allowed me to take risks and allowed me to fail, actually, in a lot of ways. Now, the TED Talk we're doing, that we're all preparing for as of today, it's called Risk in the Teenage Brain. What could go wrong? Well, some would say me. But before we get to why, I'd like to tell you how I got there. So I'm Lily's sister, a brother. I'm Lily's brother. I graduated to this as well. I remember the journey actually on the way here. The journey that was the beginning of my new life. I was leaving my friends, my school, I was leaving everything that I was starting to get so I could actually choose who I wanted to be. I could start fresh. And I remember boarding the plane. For some reason we were boarding at the front of the plane rather than the middle. We walked on. I remember walking with my guitar and Lily with her bare feet, her long hair. We walked down through first class. I fancied the TVs and the seats, and then we walked through business class to the back of economy where we sat down. And on the long, bizarre, existential 40-hour journey to the other side of the world, I really pondered success, what it meant, what it was, money, like everything. Why those people at the front of the plane were there, why they deserved to be there, how they got there, what they had. I just thought, I have these things. I want to be one of those people. I want to get off this plane, start this new life on this other side of this world, and I want to sit up there one day. And we were headed for a school called Sands, where education was in your own hands. So there were no boundaries for me, no limitations, and I was really excited. And I remember sitting down with my list of GCSEs. I didn't want to do them all, because I wanted to do well on the ones I chose, so there were 15 on offer. Instead of doing them all, I did 14. Too silly. So, why would some people say I'm a failure? I'm now in the last year of SANS. I'm 17 years old, I have 4 GCSEs, I can't speak the language, and I still get muddled up with the years of the month. So, what happened? What I'd like to explore with you is that journey and how I got to where I am now. So as you can imagine, the slow process of dropping these GCSEs was a painful one. I didn't know why I wasn't doing this. You know, that's who I wanted to be. I was someone that should be achieving something, and I just wasn't, and I couldn't work out why. And it was a really reflective time, and what I learned, which is actually really hard to talk about, but I think I learned that in New Zealand, where I was achieving, I was doing things for the wrong reason. To be ahead of the pack. And I valued myself in terms of how I compared to other people. And after learning this lesson, I made a choice. And that choice was my risk. I risked choosing to do 4 GCSEs, to focus on music, the thing I was really passionate about. I risked people thinking that I wasn't as clever as I wanted to appear, to do something I was passionate about. So now I'm in my last year of SANS, and I've got into music conservatoire already, and I've been lucky enough to be able to skip A levels and go straight there. I've been offered a place. I'm really excited about that. And the ironic thing is I've got where I wanted to go anyway, even with these few GCSEs. So I don't necessarily have a message or anything to say, but that's my story. You have some other stuff. And I think the point I can make is that when one tries to please the world around them and say the things the clever person says and do the things the clever person does, you lose the authentic you. And when your aspirations come from outside, that's a really scary thing. So, in education, I really think it's important to give students a chance to explore failure, because as you've heard from all of us, it's from failure, taking risks, that we learn things we never knew we needed to know.
Just that my risk is a door. It's called a door to my room, because at SANS you're allowed to choose to go to class. So I teach psychology, history and geography, but they're not essential. You can go through your whole life and not do any of those things and still be an amazing human. So they're not compulsory. So the only way that a young person joins me in my classroom, which is beautiful and I hope inspiring, is to make a choice to walk through my door. And there is a risk no one chooses. So when they come through the door, the risk I take is that they're giving up part of their day, which could be having an amazing cup of coffee, chatting about life, playing music, talking to friends. They give up a bit of their day to be with me. And the door may never open, and I'm redundant. So when they do open the door, for me, the thing that keeps me alive, like Minnie talks about being alive and risk, is that I feel this huge responsibility to make that moment of choice worthwhile. So as a teacher, when the child comes into your space out of choice, you owe them those 45 minutes to be rewarding. And so it inspires me as a teacher to take their risk to join me to make it an exciting moment. And they keep coming back. So it's a good risk to allow children to choose, because they engage so much more when they join you with that sense than obligation. And I understand that you guys live in schools where obligation is the nature of it, but ask yourself, how can you make it feel more like choice? So instead of pop music in their head, the brains engage like they're listening to classical. It all fires off when you bring your whole personality. And you can only do that if you choose to be with the person. So that's my risk story. Thanks, guys. We would love your feedback. Was it bits too long? Did the stories link? Did it tell a complete picture? Did it feel very non sequitous and a bit like a Trump chat where it just goes off? We'd really like to know what you felt when, firstly, you emotionally connected, which is really important for TED, and whether as a result you understood a bit more about us as a school. So any feedback would be so appreciated. Of course, you can butt yourself, but obviously criticism would be cool.
I think it's amazing. I think you all thought you guys did a really good job. You came across very confident. I think it was great that you used your personal experiences, because you did feel your experiences, and I was touched. It was very nice. Thank you. Sorry, can I just ask why you made the poster? Oh, good question. I did not. Basically, all over the world, people were doing marches
school, a lot of people said, really, you shouldn't be doing this. You're wasting your time. It'll never happen. How can someone, you were 13 at the time? You know, we're all too busy to be bothered with this, and really just kept banging through, no, this is what I want to do. And she gathered a group of people eventually, convinced them that our opinions were wrong. She needed to do this. And then everyone got on board and got very excited. We could have easily put it down and not been persuaded by this opinion here.
Thank you all for coming in today and sharing this with us. It was very impressive. Great speaking voices. And that's going to go down well with Ted. But the question I wanted to ask is, on the back of what you just said, surely what you're talking about here is also resilience, isn't it? You know, against opposition or animosity. How do we nurture, how do we create a culture in schools where resilience becomes a really important outcome?
Well, don't we have risk-averse schools? Partly because you guys are going to really love these children and want to protect them from hurt, so we won't let them fail. And schools are risk-averse because they're not allowed to look like they're failing. You put those two things together, you will not encourage children to find resilience, because you're never going to let them fail bad enough to make you look bad, but they might get hurt. And all these guys have felt really difficult times they've been allowed to go through. You're holding them through it rather than protecting them.
You only know you can get up if you fall down and get up a few times on the smaller things, so you can fight the bigger things. So the small failures allow you to cope with the bigger failures, and that builds your resilience. It's really, really important. Really, really important. We have a big sign up in our art room particularly that says you have absolute permission to fail because that makes you a brilliant artist. Please try to fail. So does anyone else have any questions that they want to ask about Park, about SANS, about anything, about education that maybe we can have a chat about? Got a little bit of time, I think.
How many people attend SANS?
Varies between 75 and 85, so it's very small. It's probably a third the size of the average primary school. Yeah. And the only way we can afford that is we've all chosen to take paltry salaries to make it, because it's a private school. But we try and make it so that it's somewhere between £20 a day to come and £40 a day. So the only way we do that is to keep it smaller to human scale, for us to take a hit. So that we're, you know, when Cameron said we're all in it together, you know, we're not. We try to make it so we're all in it together, so we take a hit, so parents who are committing a lot also know that it's not to do with feeding my salary. So small is achievable if that's what you value as teachers.
Yeah.
You spoke about how there's a lot to the outdoor environment. Do you think a school that runs on the principles of SANS would work in a city environment?
Someone asked me, they said, sounds like it's really nice, Sam, you really look after people, and it feels like it's somewhere between a dysfunctional university and family. And I said, well, and they said, will they be well resourced for the world? And I said, so what, we should treat them with sarcasm and abuse and treat them badly somewhat to get them ready for the real world. I think if you feel that you're loved and that you have meaning and purpose in life and that your voice will be respected, I think you're better resourced for whether you're in the inner city or in a privileged environment. I think that's a better preparation. And the kids coming on from Park have to go to all sorts of schools. And the story is that their entry into those new schools is celebrated as really well prepared children, even if they may not have got the SAT schools that other kids get.
Yeah, the feedback we get is that they love learning still, they're inquisitive still, they're happy to try things, and they're not frightened of their teachers, so if they don't understand, they can go and ask. And that's a lot of feedback that we get.
You should probably still teach them some martial arts though.
One of my favourite expressions, I may have said it to you before, but I never know who said it, but maybe you experts in taking risk and making mistakes might know, is that, and I used to say it to the children that I used to teach, the person that never makes a mistake never makes anything. Do you know where that comes from? No, but I...
Sounds like Henry Ford or something.
Gandhi.
Yeah, so again, it's basically saying we learn an awful lot
by making mistakes and by having the guts to push the boundaries and possibly fail. And we live in a world, don't we, that's all about success and getting things right. But it's up to you in your classrooms to actually create a culture where people feel safe, children feel safe to make a mistake. It's difficult, but that's the best way ultimately to learn. And can I just say to you, for as a bit of feedback, as well as good speaking voices, what came across to me was, well, from all of you really, is a real sense of integrity. You're speaking from the heart about some things that are quite painful and been quite difficult for you. So you've been very brave in that sense, but you've revealed something of yourself. And at a risk of hijacking what we've learned here to help you apply it to your assignment, the teaching is ultimately about being yourself with children. We all like teachers, don't we? And learn the most from people that we love and understand and have a relationship with. Sorry to go back to my lecture about relationships. But really, being yourself, being human, being vulnerable, you've got to be your starting point when you look in your reading and your assignment. What are your values and how are you going to be explicit about them in connecting with those children that you're going to be teaching? But you've perfectly communicated a lot of that to us today, along with this idea of don't be afraid to make mistakes, don't be afraid to take risks. I'd like to wish you on behalf of all of us a great, is it Friday or you're going to be? We will be. Okay. But really, really good. And thank you so much for coming and sharing so much with us. Let's give them a big round of applause.
What we need to say is that our schools are open for visits. If you would like to come and experience it firsthand and just come and muck in and make lunch with us and explore the school, then it's always open house. And if you feel it will help you in practice and talk to students and hang out with us and see what you do, then it's always open. But you're only allowed to come in at 3. Otherwise you increase the school size by 2%.
Will you be able to hang around 5-10 minutes in case anybody wants to talk to you now? Right. Please feel free to.
Thanks for giving it your time, and I know you're looking for jobs and doing assignments, so appreciate that. Thank you.
Did you get it, Ben?